Hi, this is an oral history project. I'm Carol Pohl from the sociology program in social science department. We're doing an oral history of UCE, United College employees, 4 top executive people in the UCE, and it's being done at their office on November 14th, 1995. So if maybe we could just start with you to introduce yourselves and tell us how long you've been at FIT.
I'm Joe Garofalo. I've been at the college since 1962. I'm starting my 33rd year here at FIT, and I helped form and organize this union with about 6 other people.
And what department?
I'm in the Textile Development and Marketing Department. My current position in the union, which was always my position, was treasurer. And I've been the treasurer since its inception.
Hi. Okay, I'm Judy Wood, and I've been at FIT since 1967. And I'm the secretary of our local, and I guess I've pretty much always been that. Not right from the beginning.
Not as long as I have.
No, but when I started to work here was when the first contract was signed. So I was hired right at that very first beginning. So I never worked here before the union was here, because it was in September of 1967. And also work in the library. I'm the head of the acquisitions department, and I've been that for 27 years. And I feel like I've seen this college practically double in size and in impact in New York. I think it was a little nothing 2-building place when I came, and now it's 2 blocks and it's huge, and the union's grown and the college has grown, and it's really been a wonderful experience in a lot of ways, I think.
My name is Arthur Levinson. I'm at the college since 1975. I had never taught here before. I never taught anywhere before. Started here as a full-timer, and got involved in the union rather early on, when there were a number of things that the administration tried to do to me personally, and I needed help. And Joe Garofalo in my department, and I'm in the same department as Joe, TD&M. Joe Garofalo, who was a union officer then and has been since the beginning, got me connected with the right people, and my problems got solved very, very quickly, and I felt I had a debt to repay, which is why I very early on ran for office. I started on the executive committee after not being elected a number of times, getting elected. I guess it was around 78 I got in. I became, the first officer's job I took was as a membership director. I had that for a year or so, lost an election after that, took a year's union sabbatical. I've never had a sabbatical from the college. Ran for the executive committee again, got elected. The next officership I had was assistant treasurer under Joe. And then for the last, it's got to be 10 or 11 years now, it was after George died. Immediately after George died, I became George Levinson, no relation. And I became vice president for faculty, and I've been that for the last 9, 10 years, more or less.
And now he's retiring.
Oh yes, this is my last semester.
Semester.
This is my last semester.
18 more working days?
Yes, 18. I just finished today's break.
My name is Juliet Romano, and I started at the college in 1978. I was hired as a career counselor, and I work in the career counseling and placement office, which is where I still work, half of my time. The other half of my time I spend in the union office, and I'm the vice president for contract management and grievances. I've been in that position for about 10 years, 9 or 10 years. I got involved in the union because George Levinson actually invited me to. He and I happened to meet while we were working with some students on a project, and he told me about the union and the work that the union did, and it really appealed to me. And George was a very charismatic personality. So by the sheer force of his personality, I was pulled into this wonderful organization, and I'm very proud to still be a part of it.
Okay, maybe we can touch upon the early stages of the college, what you've heard and what you know, and the early stages of the union as you've seen it develop. So if we start with the college.
Well, I just always tell this little story about when I started. I was hired in the summer, August of 1967, and the salary was $6,500 in those days. That was a reasonable salary. That was comparable, and I was pleased. And by the time I came to work, which was the day after Labor Day, in that September, I was raised to $7,500 because the contract got signed. So that was wonderful. Nice way to start. But I come from a union background, and it was never any question in my mind that if there was a union where I worked, that I would be part of it. And I guess the way I started was I got involved with a Constitution and Bylaws Committee, which was chaired by your old friend Howard. Remember that committee? Or you weren't here?
Howard Essig?
Yeah. And I was on that committee, and then I ran for the executive committee. Of course, everything was much smaller then, so I think we only had 5 officers and a much smaller group on the executive committee. But we did revise that bylaws that first year or two that I was here, because it was when the union achieved bargaining status. And I think I was maybe one of the first non-classroom representatives on the negotiating committee that first time around. I think I ran for that. That was in the days when the negotiating committee was 12 or 13 or 14 of us all sitting there with the administration. And, I mean, I spent more than half my life here. I raised 2 kids here. One's in college, one's going into high school. That's the truth.
Well, I came from a background, my family background. Both my parents were unionists. My dad was more so. He was very involved with Harry Van Osdale. They sort of were. He was vice president of the taxi cab organizer. Harry was the president. So they were very, very close. And being coming from a union family, I felt I had to stick out the tradition of being a unionist. The times when the early mid-60s, it was very difficult for faculty and staff. So difficult that you could not ride the C building elevator. It was only for the president and his guests. This was outrageous, and one of the things
Who's
that
the president?
President Bethel,
Bethel.
Lawrence L. Bethel.
That's
So much, well, I better not say that. Since this is
Not beloved.
But, because of him and some of his administrators, we formed a union. And we were very, very successful immediately after he died. And, one of the things that we had to do was we could not get promoted. We could not become chairman. You had to be picked by your friend who was the dean or your friend who was an administrator. These are the things that we had. We had long teaching hours, long work conditions. So these are the things that we fought for. We had. It was a battle.
Who selected the deans?
The president, administration, hired the 9th floor. That time was the 9th floor.
The 9th floor.
We operated only from one building, the C building. That was our only building. I was brought on here on campus by 2 of my high school professors who were then teaching here at FIT, George Linton and Joseph Pizzuto. They were both textile experts who were teaching in the high school, and they became professors here at FIT.
The high school of Central Needle Trades?
Needle Trades High School, Central Needle Trades High School, which is now known as the Fashion Industries High School.
So that's how you came here?
Yes.
I never knew that.
Was that connected with the old Straubmuller textile?
No.
Different
No,
outfit
this was a
entirely?
different outfit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was a high school, Board of Ed high school. And, most of the teachers from the high school formed the FIT.
Right, the original
All
faculty.
the original, most of the
You
high school
formed
teachers.
faculty,
Faculty.
but the college itself was formed by,
We occupied the two top floors of the Fashion Street High School. That's how we originated here at 24th Street, Needle Trades High School. And we occupied the two top floors, and I don't know, there must have been about 50 to 100 students in the first year of 1944 program. I graduated from high school there. It was about,
Long time ago.
Whatever.
Long time
you
ago.
went to that high school?
I graduated from that.
And that's
high
it.
school, yes.
I got my job through
And
the
then I
New
went
York
into
Times.
industry.
You went into what industry?
My background is quality control testing. I was taught that in the high school of Needle Trades and, as a specialty program, and I immediately got a job as a part-timer in that field. And I've been working there all my life like that, doing quality control testing. Not testing, teaching testing. Quality control factors. I'm involved also in research projects here at the college, the DuPont Carpet Project, and we just finished the New York City Transit Authority project, redesigning the New York City uniforms for the Transit Authority. And, I've been very involved in projects of that kind.
How do those projects come to FIT? How does
Well,
it happen
we're well
like the
known.
transit?
There were other colleges that were being considered for the Transit Authority, and we have some exceptional, outstanding features, like preparing fabrics to testing for quality control to see if they meet requirements. Other colleges in the metropolitan area didn't have that. They only had design capability, and this is one of the reasons why we got that project. Well, that's
I arrived here in the middle years. The first flush of growth and the really heavy antagonism pre-contract that were between administration and union people were over. I actually arrived the year before the other buildings opened up. We were still a one-building school when I got here, the C building only. Our office was a zoo. We were on the fourth floor of the C building. It was the corner nearest 7th Avenue. And in one room, about the size of about a classroom and a half, we had 4 different departments, the dean's office, all of the secretaries. My desk was halfway out into the hall. Literally, the dean's secretary, Lillian Bartok, used to keep chasing kids from sitting on my desk because I couldn't keep papers on it. And if I came in and needed privacy to talk with a student, it was always look around and see if any of the really senior people weren't at their desks, and then you could hide behind these sort of semi-partition that you had. We moved into great luxury. The first private offices and the semi-private offices with a view. That was in '76. So things substantially changed from then on, and we're still living, unfortunately, in many cases, with exactly the same space. Although Judy says we've about doubled, I think it's more than that. I think we've more than doubled. I think it's almost tripled at this point. And it's created some very serious problems at this point with space. There are some people, particularly adjuncts, and the adjunct faculty here has grown immensely in the years I've been here, from a rather small percentage to the fact that in many cases they not only outnumber the full-timers from a point of view of numbers, but hours as well within the departments. During the years here, as I said, I got involved through a debt that I felt I had, and I did have, and which probably can never be repaid. But the college itself has a debt to this union, which I don't think can ever really be repaid. it has been the one absolutely continuing, steady force in the entire time I've been here, where you always knew, and the college knew, and the students knew, that they could depend on certain things, which through changes in administration, through changes in deans, through changes that were endless in tax bases, in costs of doing things, in space, it was the one steadying force throughout where everyone always knew this you could depend on, and the contract you could depend on. And it has really made a difference. It's really made a difference in the way of life here. I'm getting a lot of it now. As my colleagues mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm retiring at the end of this semester, and therefore there's a lot of time for not time for reflection. It's a time of reflection. And an awful lot of people are coming up to me and doing some reminiscing and things like that. And it brings a lot of it back. There have been some very frightening times. There have been some very wonderful times. Overall, it's been a sensational career. Second career for me. I did 25 years in industry first.
What did you do in industry?
In industry, I was a merchandise manager of a rather large textile company, involved both in manufacturing in the United States, converting in the United States, and major importers, both from Asia and from Europe. So I had a broad base of knowledge besides a textile engineering degree from college, so that when I applied for the job here without any teaching experience, and Joe was on the committee that made the selection, I was able to get the chance. And I didn't know if I could teach. And somebody said, if you can talk, you can teach. And
Turns out that's not quite true.
I don't know if it's true or it's not, but I haven't shut up since.
That's true. Well, by the time I got here, there were a lot of buildings. And it wasn't a small school, it was rather a large school. And the thing that I was most struck by was I belong to a classification here called non-classroom faculty. And we are professionals who work out of the classroom, and I had the experience of working in at least 2 other colleges where we did not have faculty status, and here at FIT we do. And it is just a wonderful thing, and I couldn't imagine how wonderful this organization was, the union, to have bargained and gotten for the professionals the recognition that obviously I feel was richly deserved. Faculty status means a lot to those of us who are on the non-academic side of the house, and the union has fought long and hard to preserve the benefits that they've gotten. In fact, this union's been a leader in seeing that non-classroom faculty as well as staff, because we're unusual in that we represent staff. Most unions at colleges, community colleges, and senior colleges don't represent their classified staff, and we do. And I think that makes us very strong as an organization. As I said before, I think we've been a leader and we've taken a leadership role in representing both of these groups in the benefits that we've gotten for them, as well as the recognition in the role that they play in the college. Both groups, non-classroom faculty and staff, are vital to the running of every college. And to have that recognition is important. For me, I think the other marvelous thing about working in an environment where there is a good union is that you can be sure that due process is going to be followed, and people have a place to go when something goes wrong. And at FIT, it's always been the union. So much so that, as Arthur said, the college owes us a debt, and I think that's true, because even when there have been quote-unquote non-union issues, people come here and talk to us about problems that they're having that may be contractual or may not be. And the union leadership has always taken the position of helping people. Whether or not it's a contractual issue, we're here to solve problems and to make life better for everybody who works there. So I think in that instance, we serve an unbelievable role here and a very vital role in keeping the school running on a day-to-day basis.
I think
Could you explain non-faculty,
Non-classroom.
non-classroom faculty? and staff positions, examples of each, so.
Sure. Non-classroom faculty would be professionals who work in the library, anywhere in the Student Affairs Division, the Registrar's Office, career planning and placement, financial aid, counseling, student life. Staff or members of the classified staff are professionals who work in offices, doing secretarial work, doing some technical work. There are some levels of technologists who do not work in a classroom per se, but do support work for the classroom. And then actually I left out a category, and that's classroom assistants, who actually work in a classroom and support the faculty members who are there, maintaining equipment and actually getting involved in the instruction on some level when classes go in. I'm sorry? Well, I didn't mean, she said examples. I didn't mean
I wanted to-
But let's not forget admission.
I think one of the other things about the union, looking outside, is our connection to the New York City labor movement. And I think we do have a connection, and that is something worth including, I think. We're a member of the Central Labor Council, we attend their meetings, and we're also part of the Municipal Labor Coalition, which does the bargaining, collective bargaining with the city for many of its public employees. And even though FIT by many standards is a small local, I think we derive a lot of our strength through this affiliation. And I think it's proved effective with regard to even helping the administration to pick up on what some other people have said in terms of fiscal issues, where we have some connections, some influence, lobbying, right, to get things taken care of or moved along because of the connection to this larger unit.
Not only the city, but the state.
state.
I was going to
Yeah.
get to
And,
that, right.
and some federal as well,
And I-
because of us stated.
And I think it would not be immodest to say that the union was instrumental, particularly last year, in their lobbying, through their lobbying efforts in Albany, to really save this college and help bolster up a really tight economic situation. The president actually acknowledged
Right.
that.
That our lobbying,
Who did you lobby?
well, we go up to the state legislature and various key committee chair people, particularly the Higher Education Committee, who is responsible for overseeing budget or legislation, and also in the Senate. We have very good rapport. NYSET has a wonderful organization, which in Albany, that's our
New York
Could you-
State
New York
United
State.
Teachers.
New York State United Teachers, which is our statewide umbrella group, and we're just one of many, many locals affiliated with it. But they are very powerful, and I think they're the largest union in the state,
Yes.
and have professional staff in Albany with contacts in the legislature. And they help us direct our efforts to the appropriate committees or the appropriate legislators, where our message will be heard, and they coordinate these lobbying groups. And we go up there with hundreds of people and go around and visit. And as Juliet said, we were very fortunate last year in being able to get this FTE money that was raised, the full-time equivalent, per student, which helped the college balance its budget last year. And it was a key element in that balancing act. And as she says, the president, gave us some recognition for that.
Do you want to explain a little about what FTE is, full-time equivalent in
Well,
everyday
they
language?
measure the amount of money per student, and a full-time equivalent student is one who takes 12 credits. So they count up how many credit hours are being taken, and it's not the actual bodies, it's the credit hours. Right, and then you get a X amount of dollars for each one. But it isn't enough money, because what happens is that each student takes up space and needs help. Even if they're only taking one course, they're only counted as 25% of an FTE, but they're still a person. Somebody needs to talk to them.
In other words, in order to get some kind of figure that would work for continuing education students who might take one course,
Right.
what they do is take the total number of credits being taught divide by 12, and that's how many full-time equivalent theoretical students one might have.
Right.
So many dollars per full-time equivalent comes to each of the colleges in the system. We were able to help
union-
change that to a higher number.
All
Through
of
your
us
lobbying.
lobbying through
Yes.
The
NICET.
lobby.
And then, of course, on a larger scale, we have an affiliation with the American Federation of Teachers, but that's kind of tenuous, and we don't see much connection. There's a conference every 2 years, and some years there's the higher education conference that they hold, which is smaller and is a little more meaningful for us because it's just colleges from around the country. But the New York State organization is central to what we do and very hands-on and very immediate, and has been very helpful to us.
I think also Judy is being a little modest because Judy and there are other leaders in the union who are very active outside of the school in the political arena, and that has been an enormous help to us. The connections that she's cultivated through her local club and the contacts that she's been able to make primarily with Ed Sullivan has been very, very helpful. So that also added and helped us really help the college.
I think you better clarify, this is
Who
not
was-
the Ed Sullivan of the
The
old
old-
days.
right.
This
Who's
is
dead.
an assemblyman who
He's
is head of
chairs
the
the
committee
Higher
on higher
Chairs the higher ed
education
committee.
in the New York State Assembly.
And what club are you talking about?
She's talking about my local Democratic club, which is in his assembly district, and he's my assemblyman. And we're on a very close first name basis. And he actually does have a television show on cable. He calls it the Ed Sullivan Show. And he jokes about it all the time. He's really been a great friend to FIT
He has.
and to City University,
Yes.
which is even in more trouble than we are and has been so much larger, because he's very committed to public higher education. And that's been a real plus for us.
And you mentioned your linkages to other unions. What about other unions, like apparel unions and stuff?
Garment?
No.
Yeah, no. Our parent
We're-
organization is the AFL-CIO.
AFL-CIO, yes.
Part of the,
We are part of
part of the
AFL-CIO. That's where the relationship is.
But we never seem to have anything to do with them. I mean, there's certainly someone on the board of
Interesting.
trustees.
Some interesting things have happened. It's suddenly, things come popping into your mind out of the past. A relationship will develop suddenly when a need occurs. I can remember it must be 12, 13 years ago, maybe different, where Radio City Music Hall, the musicians went out on strike. And we were having graduation the next day, and therefore, how in God's name are we ever going to have music for them? And we would not cross the picket line. So there was chaos for a while, and then Lou Stoller called up the president of the head of the musicians union,
Local 802.
Local 802, and explained the problem, and a news conference was held whereby they said for the 2 or 3 hours of our graduation, they were going to temporarily suspend the strike and let one of their musicians come in and play that monster organ in Radio City, and the kids have, as a bow to their sister union, the UCE of FIT. And this was in the papers, and this was on the radio and on TV. And we had our wonderful graduation, and then afterwards, he asked us if ever we have a situation where we need a band to march in a demonstration, just let him know, because he liked the photo opportunity as well that we gave them. So it does happen. They are our brothers and sisters.
we work very close with them.
Yeah.
Well, whenever there's we have always made contributions. We get requests from
What?
teacher unions that are on strike or other striking unions around the country, especially if they are AFL-CIO. And we always send money,
Always.
and I think other unions around the country do too, and you feel that it's really important to help these people, because nothing is worse than not getting your paycheck when you're out on strike, and it's not a step that you take lightly. So we've felt that as a union comradeship thing, that's important, and we always do it.
We've also interacted with the farm workers, with the Chavez group, until he passed away 2 years ago, and we're still that way with his successors. Again, mostly through the state and national organizations.
And I think even when we've been at conventions and there's a strike in the city and we've gone on picket lines.
We've gone on
In
picket
Pittsburgh,
lines,
I remember
right.
there was a newspaper strike.
Newspaper strike.
And
And
in
Chicago, a newspaper
Pizza
strike.
Hut, we picketed
And
Pizza
Pizza
Hut
Hut.
in Los
So
Angeles.
wherever we are, if there's a strike, the local place will contact the AFT because, or the, NICET, they know we're here. And it's a great thing for their people to have all these hundreds of teachers out on their picket line with them.
Support.
We've been in.
Yeah, it
My
really is.
first venture in picketing was in the early 60s at St. John's University when Father John Rowley started a strike at St. John's University. That was before we
That was
even
before
got
I
started.
came.
We went to support St. John's
The
University.
UCE did.
Yeah.
Well, it was called the
weren't.
United Federation of College
College.
Teachers then. We were part of a union that eventually became the Professional Staff Congress. That unit. City
Did
University.
anybody talk to you about the United Federation of College Teachers?
Oh, well, you tell us.
Well, that was
That's it,
how we
because-
started, because when I first got involved, we didn't have our own local. We were part of this group called United Federation of College Teachers, and it included CW Post and LIU and Pratt Institute. It was a couple of private.
And some of the city unions.
And
I think so.
No.
I don't
They
think
were
so.
doing it.
I don't think City
no,
was
that was
involved.
separate. And we used to have these meetings over at Park Avenue South, and the president of that group was a man named Iz Kugler, who is now retired, but he's still around. And I was a delegate, and Lou was a delegate. That's right. That's how we started. We didn't have our own executive. I had forgotten about that. And the first NICET convention that there was, Lou and myself and
Yes,
Dwayne
Nick.
Peterson were the three delegates, and we went on the bus
Yeah, well, I'm involved.
to Montreal because we didn't have the money to take the plane, which is how we fly now. The three of us on that bus, I'll never forget it. And Lou and Dwayne shared a room, and I got my own room because I was the only woman in the room. And there was a merger thing at that time that had taken place between New York State United Teachers and a group called NYSTA, which was New York State Teachers Association, which was an NEA affiliate as opposed to an AFT. And they had merged, but there was still a lot of fighting going on, and that was their first convention. It was in Montreal, 1973. And that's right. And then at some point, we broke away from that group and formed our
Formed our
own
own
local,
local.
and I'm not even sure what year that was.
What about the connection with there are unions
But
on
we had
the
our
Board of
25th anniversary,
Trustees?
so whatever. Well, there's the ILG person.
Aren't there unions on
Yes.
the Board of Trustees?
There's this
Yes.
one from the
Jay
ILGW,
Okay.
and they've never been friendly to us.
But remember, the Board of
Particular.
Trustees are the ones who make decisions on behalf of the administration and the college. They make all of the decisions of the college. They are the employers.
Their management.
So they
The
are
management.
them.
Right.
We are us.
They're also appointed by the governor, aren't
They are also appointed by the governor, and they are for certain terms.
Right.
And of course, depending on the politics of the individual governor, you may get all kinds of mixes there.
But the original founding of the college and the efforts to organize in the college, did the union play a role? The unions that set on
The original founding of the college, 50
the
years ago?
founding of the local here.
No, the
No.
AFT
To
had a
my
lot of
knowledge,
it. We
they
had a
didn't.
lot of support from the AFT
Not
and the
from the garment
UFCT.
workers.
The
Yeah.
UFT, United Federation
Right.
Of teachers.
which is then was Al Shanker, now Sandy Feldman.
Right.
But we had our welfare plan from them already. We were part of the UFT welfare. They embraced us.
But
I
not
think-
the
No, I
unions
think
that
the
set on
difference
No.
is public unions versus private.
Yes.
And that's the issue. See, the people who are in the garment workers union work for private
Private
companies. And it's a different kind of structure. They're governed by different legislation.
And different laws.
And the employers are businessmen. This is a not-for-profit kind of organization, and unionizing there is a different kind of thing because we're not dealing with this profit issue, which corporations are constantly dealing with, for example, United Auto Workers.
Although
So
one
it's a
would
different
sometimes
wonder.
wonder when one deals in situations like this.
Whose money is this anyway?
Because basically, sometimes money is looked to be saved for the purpose of saving money rather than any other purpose. I mean, it's not an end unto itself when you are a non-profit or not-for-profit,
Not-for-profit, and
or
yet-
a government. We're actually an arm of the government.
Right.
We're part of the
Right.
educational
Right.
arm of the government.
Right.
And that's why one wonders. The support has really always come from, and from us too, primarily other teacher organizations of one kind or another. Joe mentions one picketing. I can think of two others instantly. I can remember picketing outside of Cooper Union, and they asked us to come in caps and gowns, and they picked the windiest day of the year. And
They did
I am
not.
telling, oh God,
Well, they didn't picket.
well, I don't know. We picketed all right, but those gowns and those mortarboards, I can tell you, was a riot going on with it. And then
NYU.
another day, not NYU, Cooper
I remember
Union.
picketing at NYU.
NYU,
I
we
just-
did
Right, I remember. For the staff.
for the staff,
Right.
and we did Nassau, Suffolk Community
Suffolk,
College
I remember
on what had to
Suffolk.
be the hottest day of the year.
One summer.
Also.
Oh, you see,
Yes,
you should have come
once-
to NYU. It was a lovely afternoon.
One summer, that's true.
I did. I
We
was
went out to
there. I lived 2 blocks from
One
there,
summer,
so
we
I
went out
remember
to
walking
Suffolk
Very
when they were
good.
having a problem getting their contract through
Right.
their county legislators. And we
Right.
went out and supported them.
Yeah.
And we've been very
And they won.
fortunate here that we've never had to do that right here.
Yeah, we have been.
No. We have
Why is that? Why do you think that's true?
We have
Because
great
had-
leadership
We
here.
had, at one time, we
That's
had
why.
a great president for about 20 some odd years
That's one reason.
Talking of the college,
at the
Yes.
college.
The college.
it's more than that for
That's what
the
you want.
union.
You're talking about Marvin Feldman?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right.
And we worked very closely with him. And he,
There was a spirit of cooperation that pervaded the atmosphere. And of course, as I said earlier, nobody wants to strike. But it never even came to that. I mean, we
No.
always had a way of working out the problems, which we hope we can continue.
Yeah. I think also under Marvin, one always got the feeling that this school was people, it was flesh and blood. It just wasn't walls and desks and computers
And bottom lines.
dollar signs. You knew he didn't always agree with us. We had
No.
battles with
That's
Marvin.
a very wild battle.
But he came from that point of view. But you always knew he cared about you. Even when he was fighting with you, he cared about you. And I think that it was a very, very important ingredient. It's what made the school so successful, and hopefully, as Judy says, we will continue to find a way to work that way again.
This is, we think going to be a tough negotiation with the new team, but we're optimistic.
You have negotiations going on now.
They will start
will
December
start
15th.
Pre-negotiations.
contract.
Yes.
We're doing some
Yes.
specific issues separately early. That'll be over this week probably, but the real negotiations will start December 15th.
What's the structure for negotiating? What's the union? What's the mechanism you use to negotiate? The executive board negotiates? You have a
No,
specific-
we have
it's
a
a
team.
We have a team. We
It's
have
a team, selected team.
Actually, it's two tiers. There are the actual people who go in and negotiate, which are usually 5 or 6 union officers, although we haven't really made that decision at this point. There's also a negotiating committee who plays an important role, as well as the executive committee, because while they may not be at the table, they are often, we've had times when we've negotiated where the negotiating committee has been in the next room. And we've caucused with them from time to time when issues come up and suggestions were made about how to resolve a problem. So our philosophy has been to spread out the decision-making as widely as possible, drawing in the executive committee who represent every group in the college, and the negotiating committee who are elected by everyone in the college, or everyone in the union, I should say, to participate.
And how do you get feedback from people in the college?
Well, we hold, before negotiations, when we're putting our package together, which is kind of what we're going through right now, we hold meetings. And we invite every single group to come and talk to us, talk to the union leadership, and let us know what's on their minds, what's working in the contract, what isn't working, and what they need. We've also sent out letters requesting things in writing. And then what happens is everything that comes in, it is not censured in any way.
Censored, not censored.
Thank you, Arthur.
That was
a good slip.
that was Freud. That was Freud talk.
That was Freud. It's not censored in any way, and it's brought before the executive committee where it is debated and a vote is taken. And if the recommendation or suggestion is voted up, it goes into our package that we present to the administration. If it's voted down, it is not part of our package. And that pretty much is the mechanism.
So we're just about finished with that process.
Yes,
and,
we are.
We have a meeting set with them for mid-December.
Then meeting.
With the administration, with their team, and
Who's on their team?
That's
We're
up
not
to
really
them.
sure
we
yet.
think, we have some.
That's up to them.
The team we've been meeting with up to now.
We don't know.
We really don't know. We really don't know. What happens at
So-
that meeting then would be, we would present ours,
Demands.
they would present theirs, and that probably is what the first meeting is. Then you go back and you close yourself behind doors with these various backup people that we spoke about. And at that point, you then do a lot of yelling, how dare they, and who do they think they are.
What, are they
I'm
crazy?
And I'm sure they're doing the same thing. And then you get at the table and start arm wrestling.
So
And it takes
that'll
its-
be next semester.
Then it takes its course.
Right. We also have, it might be worth mentioning, two tiers of negotiations. What we do here in the college is the governance part of the contract. The money, our pay raises, is done with the city, and as Judy mentioned, we're part of the Municipal Labor Coalition, so that is negotiated separately from all of our governance issues, and that's done as part of this larger group.
Which means all the unions, what other unions are in there?
Well, it includes the DC 37, which is all the civil service employees, and it includes City University, and the UFT has been in and it's been out, and we're not sure where they're going to be on that one.
The communications workers.
United Federation of Teachers, that's the New York
That's
City
the
School.
UFT,
Right,
K
right.
through
The
12.
communications workers, CWA, and there were some other smaller ones
It's
that
the
didn't.
communications workers. They work where?
They're municipal workers who honestly, I'm not quite sure.
They were organized by
But-
the communication workers, even though they are office workers. Just like you'll have certain
Yeah, there's a
retail
group,
people in the
right.
warehousemen's union.
Right.
and
There's even there's a
Teamsters
Teamsters,
having
the
nurses
Teamsters are
and
part
there's a
of it.
small
and so on.
Teamsters local that's in
There
there.
are a lot
They
of people
work
involved.
for the city. That's the issue.
These are
So
pretty
these
much
are
all of the
public
non-uniform
services.
services. The non-uniform people are usually.
So it includes sanitation.
But
Or
it's
just-
No, it
state
doesn't.
money
No,
that
it's-
we
They're
get
uniform.
state money as well. We don't just get city
Well,
money.
that's
Not
funding for the
running
of the
operations
school,
college.
operating the
It's not
school.
salaries.
It's not salaries. Salary comes from the city.
The city, the New York City Board of Education is our local
They're our
sponsor.
sponsors.
So that's why we're in that negotiating.
There are by law certain percentages that each have to contribute, and certain monies are capital money and certain monies are operating money. And they are they seem to be, for some reason or other, very holy. And this shall not entereth upon this place. And it pretty well happens that way.
That's very biblical.
Unfortunately, it's very much the way it can often happen. And there can be surpluses sitting in one area where they'll say, you can't touch that for this, but we're going bankrupt here. And you can't touch that for this.
Well, it's legislative, and it's very
So,
hard to get it changed.
It is what it is. And of course, that's part of the administration's job to sort this thing out and make sure that it's there for everything. Fortunately, this college is in a position where they have good reserves in both areas. So fortunately, we should not, I'm not saying we won't, we should not have any very serious problems getting through this contract. There will be problems to solve, but it's not a question of survival. Certainly not a question of survival.
So we'll do it.
Yes,
Just the will.
it's the will and the goodwill.
Do you want to touch upon students at all, the union's role with students, or changes you've seen in students in the various careers here, at FIT?
Well, I think the union's role with students is in some ways minimal, except that we are quite involved with having this run as a first-class educational institution. And a lot of the things that we have in our contract has a double benefit. It's a benefit to people who work here, but it is also a benefit to the students. As I meet students from other institutions, our council students, who come to us on the one-year program, one of the things that they always remark upon is our class size and how wonderful it is to be in a school where they're in a class where they feel they can actually learn, because maybe there's only 25 or 27, tops 30 people in a class. I think that's something we take for granted here, and people tend to look at it as a work issue. But in fact, it's an educational issue. We attract students because of that. The quality of education that we're able to deliver is that much better because we have certain rules that are here. What I've noticed about students in the time that I've been here is that there's been a change. The biggest change, and from a career planning and placement point of view, is many, many more of our students need financial aid and need to work more. Even those students who come here full-time are holding down jobs that are so-called part-time. They're working 30 or 40 hours a week. And I think this puts a tremendous strain on what they can do academically and what they can do to enhance the whole experience of being in college. And that's really a shame.
I think another thing that might be mentioned is this. When I first got involved with the union, I have many friends who are not union people. I have many friends who are anti-union people. And you get comment about how are you getting involved? Why are you getting involved with a thing like that? Don't you know they protect the weak? Not the weak. They protect the lazies. They protect the people who shouldn't be teaching, who shouldn't be there. All of the things that I'd heard continually before I got involved. And my answer then, and I think it's part of what you're talking about now, what you're questioning now, is that every issue I have ever heard since I've been an officer, and we have a committee, by the way, of officers called the Administrative Committee, ADCOM is what we call it, and we meet every week, and we debate things every week, and there are rounds where everyone who has an individual problem or issue to discusses it. And from the very first meeting I was at, among the things discussed with every issue was not only how will it affect our constituency, not only how it will affect our people, us personally, but how will it affect the students and how will it affect the institution. Every decision we've ever made has been made with all of those issues looked at, examined, and so on. It, to me, is very unique, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why we've been so successful, because the group, as such, is a very unique group. We come from different backgrounds. We represent different parts of the community here, but the philosophy has always been the same. What will be the right thing and the good thing and the best thing for the combination, for the people who work here, for the people who study here, and for the institution itself. And it's really made a difference.
You think the union has an award, though, it gives to students?
Yeah, we did with George Levinson
We have
Scholarship.
the George Levinson Scholarship Fund that we give out to students from the different divisions of the college. The business and technology division, we have, and now we're up to 2 awards.
No, one for each.
One for each.
One for
And the art and design.
And art and design. These are students who are going on to upper division, who have graduated and completed our associate's division. So that, in other words, again, this is the kind of thing which points exactly what I was just saying. Not only does it help the students, but it specifically is intended to help the institution. Because what it does is it makes it possible for more students to get into our upper division. We could do this for people who are going on to other places. They don't get the money until they until they register for their first semester of the upper division. That's when they get the money.
One of the important criteria for those scholarship winners, in addition to scholarship, is some kind of community service or something in their background, because this scholarship was named after this person we had talked about earlier, George Levinson, who was killed in this tragic accident, who was really an outstanding individual who affected all of us, was very important to us in this union and in his community.
He was very active.
Right, and that is
That little drawing, you see up in the middle, on the
There's
top?
actually-
That's
there's a
George, and there's a
photograph.
photograph of him right in
We
the
got them all over
There are
the
3
place.
photographs.
He's up
We
there,
all-
right there, but
Yeah.
We
George
miss
right
him
there.
terribly,
Yes.
We
and
all-
that was why we started this in his honor and in his memory.
right there, dump Reagan.
Even Ronald Reagan is starting to look good to me.
But isn't
So
it, but isn't it
good.
amazing that 10 years after the man has passed away, you can see how many times he still comes up in conversation and is still a part of what we do.
And pictures are still up on the wall.
And these students are great.
We love them.
We get together
We
with
love
them
them.
every year when we have a little lunch and give them the awards, and they've gone on, and most of them are actively working successfully in the industry, and it makes us feel good to see that we picked people who were worthy.
Well,
I
these
guess is the word.
are great young people, great young people. Their names, by the way, are all on a plaque outside
Yeah, we're gonna take a
our office
picture
here,
of that
so
flag, too.
they can always come back and show their grandchildren.
Their grandchildren.
Time will come.
Awesome.
Several of them are parents.
So,
Uh-huh.
carried away here.
Is there anything, we're closing, coming to the close, is there something you'd like to add that you'd like to be part of the record? The story of FIT, the development of the union.
I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to look forward to what I'm looking forward to, but I'm going to miss it. This is my family. This is my
guess so.
close family.
I guess I feel like we're really entering a new era here.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. This new administration has been a radical change from what we've been used to. It's the only one Juliet ever knew.
Ever.
Joe's known them all.
And I feel we're reversing,
Yeah.
we're going back to this thing.
the
So
one I know of.
we're really on the
I just hope
threshold
Mom
of
was
some
here.
kind
I
of
hope we could swing this around and
yes,
change.
So,
Go back.
and I think though it's connected with the atmosphere in the city and in the nation apparently right now. So it's really up in the air how we're going to come out. I guess we'll be all right. I think the industry is strong and there's a need for it. But right now I'm feeling looking forward to something really different. I don't know, looking forward to it, but anticipating something quite different.
I echo Judy's sentiments, but I think as we've all said, we all have a history, and the history is that the union's always been the constant, and I think
Yeah.
that will continue to be true.
I do too.
That even though times may be a little different, a little tougher, we'll be here, and we'll be watching out for our members and involving our members and caring for our members.
we're the
and
continuity.
that is not going to change.
And we've been a leader, and we hope to continue to be a leader.
That's the thing. We have the continuity. The administration is a completely new set of players. And that's our strength, I think.
Definitely. That and the caring.
Yeah.
That and the caring and our constituency. Because we really feel that the faculty is with us, that the staff is with us, and that they understand that we're with them. I don't think we've ever been closer than we are right now with all the people out there. And it's what makes it work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice ending there. That's why I said cut it.
What happened?
That's why I said that was a nice ending.
Oh.
Yeah.
And he's making, and Lou's making faces.
Oh,
Lou's
I'm
making faces.
sorry. You were great. You were great.